Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new motorsport podcast series. I'm Ed Foster, and this time we're turning our attention to Porsche. The series is called Porsche's Winning Formula. Ever since Ferdinand Porsche designed the Volkswagen Beetle in 1939, 8 years after launching his eponymous company in 1931, Porsche has been at the forefront of vehicle design. While the Pretty 356 was the first car to carry the Porsche name in the late 1950s, many of you will automatically think of the 911 that arrived over 10 years later. Arguably the most successful sports car of all time. The model is still being built nearly 60 years later. In those years, Porsche has won the Le Mans 24 Hours more than any other manufacturer. It's been victorious in Formula One, both as a constructor and an engine supplier, and it's won countless GT championships with its beloved 911. Porsches have even done rallycross and rallying. In this special podcast series, we are going to speak to the racers that are at the forefront of the German manufacturer's racing development and key names from the road car side to get a better idea of how this great company has had so much success for so long.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Motorsport Podcast. I'm Ed Foster, and this episode is in partnership with the British luxury yacht manufacturer, Princess Yachts. Now, this is another podcast in our Porsche's Winning Formula series, and we've got an absolute treat for you today. We are joined by one of the greatest architects of Porsche's sports car success across 4 decades, Norbert Singer. A very, very warm welcome.
Thank you.
Now we've got a lot to talk about because really, I've been reading up about everything you did throughout your time at Porsche and everything else over the last 4 or 5 decades, and there's no way we're going to be able to cover everything. But tell me a bit about what you're doing now, because you were working with Le Mans, and what are you up to at the moment?
No, the working with Le Mans was stopped in in 4 years ago or so, something like this, because they organized it new. There came new people because the effort getting bigger and bigger, and so I went out, but I'm still a guest at Le Mans. And I think this is okay for me. I'm pretty old already, so I must not go to every meeting in Paris or at Le Mans or whatever.
Yeah. What I really wanted to do was sort of rewind right back to the start, because I read something. Is it right that you wanted to be a rocket scientist originally?
Basically, yeah. This was my first idea. Because in these days, in the 50s, when space science got more popular, rockets going up, satellites at least were starting, and it was a very interesting science. And I was studying in Munich in university, and I had the opportunity to go to some lectures from famous people. And 1 or 2 were important. I think was very important for me. One was Wernher von Braun. You probably know him. He went after the war to the Americans and was helping there for the moon probe. But his teacher was Hermann Obert. That know him is probably not so famous, but he wrote very interesting books about what you can do in space with satellites. And this he wrote already in the 30s and 40s years, so 1930 or something like this. So nobody in these days were really thinking about space science and how the satellites came up. And I was once I had the opportunity to talk to him, and it was very, very interesting. How he explained it. And for a normal student, first of all, it's why are the satellites not falling down to the Earth or so? And how big must they end sending probes to the moon or so on? And the distances are unbelievable far, and and all these funny things were really interesting. So, but besides, I was also a little bit in motorsport. I visited some races, and so at the end of my studies, I had to make a decision, one or the other way. And one gentleman in the university, he said, you had to go, actually in Germany, we are a car company, a car country. And science, space science is just living on the support of the government. And when they stop the money, you have no job. So it's really, and actually he was right in these days. So, and then I got the opportunity to go to Porsche in the racing department.
But I think didn't you look at going to Opel before Porsche?
Yeah, well, this was the first idea of going to Opel, because I talked to a guy. He had some connections to Opel in Rüsselsheim, the headquarters, and they said, well, we are looking for young engineers, and you have the possibility after 1 or 2 years to go. You were sent to General Motors in America. And this was exciting, because in these days, traveling to America, it was something, not common. It was quite interesting. So, and therefore, and when I got the information, they were asking, Porsche was asking for a young engineer, they could support him or help him or so, and they said, the guy said yes. I had to ask, and then he asked me and said, what do you think about going to Porsche? And I said, well, I'm talking already with Opel. And then he said, well, they're looking for somebody for the race department. I said, this is different. I changed my mind.
But your start with Porsche wasn't that easy, because I don't think you knew you even got the job, did you?
Yeah, they forgot to send me a contract, and so I was sitting at home, and my father was already laughing, because he doesn't like these. He said, well, Porsche is a small company, and how long they will do it, and Opel is a big company, so your job is sure, you have no problems there. But I said, well, I will do some years in racing. And the guy, when I talked to the Opel guy, and he said, well, it's no problem at all. After 2 or 3 years to come to Opel, and you are more valuable because you have quite some experience.
Yeah. Interestingly, when I very first applied for Motorsport magazine, well, it's about 13 years ago now, they didn't tell me I'd got the job either. And it was very similar to you with Porsche. And I called up asking whether they'd made a decision. They said, oh yeah, you've got the job, we forgot to tell you. So it's not just you. You're right. You arrived at Porsche, and really this was in the height of, before Porsche's first Le Mans win. The 908 hadn't quite managed it in the late 60s, and you arrived, with a 917 going to, I think it was in March that year. So you had 3 months to help with the 917 before that 1970 Le Mans. And it's not like it is today. I think you were thrown kind of right in the deep end, weren't you? Because you were working on the gearbox, you were working on something else as well. It must have been quite a baptism of fire.
Well, well, as a young engineer, and you're very excited with racing anyhow, because I had, when I was visiting some races, especially one at Monte Carlo, and in these days you could really watch the car, because the cars were in different garages all over the city, and you could walk in and could see the race car very close. There was no paddock in the idea of today. So so now I was personally involved in development of a race car. So and Porsche in these days, the Porsche racing department these days, there are not so many people. And of course, that's why they were looking for a young guy who could support them. And I was thrown into the daily work, actually. can you do this? They have a problem with gearbox cooling. Can you take the car going to wind tunnel, improve the drag and all these things? So it was very exciting, and I learned within weeks a lot.
yeah, I can imagine because you.
Because you were doing your job, and several days later there was run a test, and it shows your job was fine, or you had to continue.
Yeah.
And so for this was, I think this is the most important part in racing. You get immediately results from your work.
Yeah.
And not waiting 4 or 5 years till the car is in production or not.
Yeah, because that was, when Porsche stopped its motor racing, and you ended up going to the road car side. I think that was one of your problems, wasn't it? That in racing everything is so immediate, whereas with the road car side, everything just takes so much longer, and you weren't particularly a fan of that.
Yeah, because Porsche was stopping the big racing in 72 because the 917 was no longer allowed to race. They changed regulation to the 3-liter prototypes. The 3-liter prototypes, Porsche had a 908, but the engine was air cooled and the power was not as good as the Cosmos engine or the other 4-valve water cooled engine they had. So it doesn't make sense to continue. And in these days, I think it was Porsche was changing to an AG, so we got a board, and the head of the board was Dr. Fuhrmann. He was in the old days engine designer with the old Professor Porsche, so the father of Ferry Porsche, and he was actually, it turned out, a kind of racer, because he was doing these special racing engines, and he had quite a sensible idea of Porsche should stay in racing. And he said with the 917, even with the Can-Am, we cannot afford it. When you imagine in these days, I had a look later, Porsche was selling 15,000, 17,000 cars per year, which is actually nothing. But they do it in a week today or in 2 weeks. So, and when you see the money you earned, it was not just spent in racing. You had to spend it in road car development. Lots of emission tests were coming up, crash tests coming up. So the people who were working on the road cars, there was a big job for them, and they need the money. So, but he still said, okay, we do a little racing because Porsche is racing, and we try to continue. And therefore, he started this RSR project.
Mm.
It was coming down from a kind of overall wins to class wins or so. But anyhow, it was, for me, it was a wonderful years.
Yeah. I think sort of nowadays it's easy to see marketing as kind of an extension of the market. Sorry, racing as an extension of the marketing kind of side of a company. Whereas then, back in the 70s and to a certain extent the 80s, racing was very much done to improve the breed. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's right. Now it's marketing, and even you see it's interesting when you see the press releases when they come from Porsche or from Toyota or whatever who is doing it. Sometimes I had the feeling these papers are written for the board to inform the people in the board what they are doing, and and in the old days it was more technical. We said we did this and this, it doesn't work, and so okay, but we'll do it next time better. Now everything is marketing.
Yeah. How much, just to rewind to that 1970 Le Mans, I know you'd obviously just arrived, but there must have been a fair amount of pressure on Porsche to be successful at Le Mans that year, because it was very much the race the company wanted. Did you notice that when you arrived?
Yeah, sure, because with all the people you were working, and you started and said, okay, I do that, and so on. Said, yeah, but do it carefully because we had to win Le Mans. Because when you see the year before, Porsche lost the race by 2 seconds or so, and they always, and Porsche was since I think 51 when they started, every year with a car with customers or factory cars at Le Mans. And Le Mans is very, very, or was in the old days, very important for Porsche, because Le Mans is that's what a Porsche means. So it means speed, because on the long straight you have a high top speed, and reliability. You had to run 24 hours, and that's exactly what fits to Porsche: fast and reliable.
Yeah,
and not exotic cars. So it was. That's why it's very important for Porsche to win Le Mans. And of course, there was a lot of pressure but anyhow, everybody worked as good as it was possible, and well, it worked. And at the end of the day, we won Le Mans, and this was important. And so actually, the big goal was achieved.
Yeah, you did a lot of work on the aerodynamics of the 917. And obviously, I think you're always told as an aerodynamicist, certainly at Le Mans, improve the drag, don't reduce the downforce. And wasn't one of the big kind of tests whether or not you could take the Mulsanne kink flat? Was that one of the kind of the barometers you worked to?
Yeah, well, this was actually what we learned, but it turned out that in the old days, we had a full-scale wind tunnel. So you took the car, the race car, mostly the test car, into the wind tunnel, and of course everybody was looking for the drag, because the top speed was very important in the old days. But it turned out, and we saw quickly that the downforce balance was not right. But you don't have really a feeling, because the forces in these days were not so big, so there was not a real feeling where you changed something and said, this is a big step. So, and during testing and wind tunnel testing and road testing, we learned how important these balance is. But of course, you could not, as a young engineer, you could say, okay, I make a more downforce, I make a good balance, but unfortunately the drag is going up. So this was not the kind what you can do, because your boss comes up and says, "What are you doing? That's we are not asking for." Yeah, I said, but it's well. So and therefore we could make a good drag by a reasonable balance. And when I talked some time ago with Jackie Oliver, and we talked about the kink and all these things, he said, well, this was a perfect situation. In 71, it was perfect.
Yeah. I think it's because with Derek Bell going through there, he went through the kink not lifting after you'd done some aerodynamic work at sort of 8,000 revs, which turned out to be 246 miles an hour through the kink, which is astonishing in 71, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was. Yeah, but this shows that the work we did was pretty fine, and you could see it on the circuit.
Norbert, am I right at that time you were also testing ABS, or you were using a very mechanical version of ABS as well? Because it's something I read about and I had no idea that Porsche was doing it all the way back in the early 70s.
Yeah, ABS, the system itself took a very long time to develop it, also for the road cars. But it came up in the 70s or 69s. On this kit system, and Porsche, of course, was interesting, and there were several companies working on these systems, but the most promising was Teltix. Teltix was a small company, and their system was, we tested it on road cars, was actually the best. So our head of the board came up and said, well, let's try. And Teltix said, we have a contract with Mercedes-Benz. And from our side, Mercedes-Benz will be the first on the road to have this system. This is written by contract. So you will be second for the road cars.
Yeah.
And then the board came up and said, okay, well, we are second in the road car, but we should be first in the race car. So we started developing this system for the race car. And my very first race as an responsible engineer was in '71 in Austria, in Zeltbeck, the circuit, with Dr. Marco and Gerard Larousse. And we raced with an ABS system in '71 already.
Amazing. That was fitted to one car, wasn't it?
Yeah, to one car, of course. This was actually a kind of test car. So, and we had a lot of problems in practice, in qualifying, and actually in the race, the driver switched it off very early because they were, because when the system is not really 100% reliable, of course, and the driver are racing, so and you had a bad feeling, so you switch it off and start your race.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, at I don't know, at the half of the race and so on, they crashed in the guardrail because of, I don't know what happened really. The car was a little bit damaged. So the race was over, and this was typical in these days for Porsche. I said, okay, can you repair it? I said, yeah, we can do it. So we repair the car on Monday morning and do another test on Monday or Tuesday, because we want to continue developing, because it was all under the headline of development. Not just because for winning the race, it was John Wyer was working on that, and Rodriguez and Siffert were. So we were actually in the background to do some development, and that's what we did. We repaired the car, and on it was funny. On Monday, the system works perfect, and the car we did faster times than in qualifying.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the Pink Pig. Because I do a fair bit of work at Goodwood, and whenever that car, it's the car that everyone goes to look at out of sort of all the 917s. And actually, the kind of, I think you were working with a French firm on the aerodynamics that kind of made it that kind of bulging sort of bodywork. Is that right?
Yeah, this was with the Institut Eiffel in Paris. Yeah. Porsche was working with them already in '69 and '70, and they did also these 908-3, and they worked also on a long tail version of the 917, but this was not really working. So we tried it, but then we had to. Then this was also one of my jobs to make the car drivable. And so they came up and said, well, we can make a 917 with the drag of a long tail car, but with the downforce of a short tail car, which sounds perfect. And that's why the 917-20 officially it was called. Now everything was a pig because it was funny painted. And it turned out that it had the downforce of a short tail, but unfortunately also the drag of a short tail. So it does not really work. Yeah. And it was only one car built. It was also a kind of, okay, we will try and we will see to develop and so on. And the car raced in '71 and was crashed by Reinhold Joest, I think, in the race. So actually a race history was not given. It is only famous because of the silly painting.
Yeah, but it's funny that because there seems to be a trend at Porsche where obviously this car, I think it was Tony Lapine that painted it. Yeah,
Right.
and it was after someone said, "Oh, it looks like a pig," but there's a kind of
because of it looks like when the car is normally white. It was painted white in the pre-practice.
yeah,
And because they tried hard to reduce the drag and made all these corners on the car, the wheel arches and so, with big radius, and that's why it looks like at the end you said, okay, it's like a pig, it's fat and so on, but it was the basic idea was fine, but this didn't work really.
But fast forward to the 935, the 936, and suddenly you've got a grey GT or a prototype Porsche sitting there, and someone says it looks like a whale, and it's called Moby Dick. There's a theme at Porsche for naming cars after animals.
No, the names are just by accident somehow.
Yeah.
Because the name Pig from 917, I don't know who came up with that, because maybe some journalist or whatever said, it looks like and Tony Lapine made it as a pig. The Moby Dick actually was, the car was, when it was finished for the first rollout, it was painted completely in white, which is a normal color for Porsche's race car, without any sponsors at the beginning, and with this very wide car and very low, because it was the floor was cutted, so it was, when it was standing on the first time on the wheels, I think one of the mechanics said, "Look, it looks like Moby Dick." Yeah, it's a famous name.
You mentioned the 911, the RSR earlier, which is really, people always think of the 917s, the 935s, the 962s, but really the 911 RSR is one of the most iconic Porsches of all time, for me anyway, certainly the racers. You went to Daytona with it as an engineer. You went to the Targa Florio. What was the Targa Florio like? Because was it considered just another race then? I always look back on it with sort of such amazement that a race like that could happen.
Well, it was actually, Targa Florio is a very old race. I think it was first time in 1906 or 7 or something like this. It's very old. So it was a tradition. And like Le Mans, Targa Florio, Spa, Nürburgring, these traditional circuits. Notchlife at Nürburgring was a similar situation. Well, it was not an open road, but in Italy it was possible to race on open roads. Nobody cares. And that's why the tradition could build up. And when we went there, like to a normal race, because it was on our schedule, Targa Florio, and it was tradition to go there. Porsche has won it several times with the 908 and 906 and so on. And so it was for us a normal race. And in the old days, there was no paddock. Like I told you in Monaco with Formula One, there was no paddock. So everybody had to look for a garage to stay in there and work in there. And for practice, you put the car on the truck, or in Italy it was easy, or in France it's easy to run the race car on the open road through the normal traffic. Nobody cares. You don't need a license number or so. When the police make the stop the other traffic and let you run with the race car through the traffic, was perfect. So it's but they all were enthusiastic, and so we had a coming back to the workshop. We had a small garage which was dirty, and I think there were animals in the garage, which was a garage. Now it was an animal, but they put the animals out, and so we went in, and then Italian journalist, it was from Colini, I think. It was former working with Ferrari in the very old days, and he came up and said, And they said, look, it's terrible here, so we should go home because we couldn't work on the cars. And he said, in this garage were Mercedes already, and they won Targa Florio. So this was building up a little bit, and so we cleaned the garage, and then we could work, so it was not a problem. And at the end, okay, we were lucky to win it.
But was it not 1 year at Le Mans where because you used to stay sort of outside of the circuit and have a garage, as you were talking about. And I think wasn't the 1 year that you left a bit late and the very officious policeman wouldn't actually let your cars into the circuit, the race cars?
Yeah, it was, Le Mans was similar. We have a garage in a small village close to Mulsanne. And you drove the car, of course, on the road to the circuit. And in Mulsanne, where the racetrack gets through, there was a police. Yeah, and normally you had to. They closed all the circuit at a certain time. I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning or so. And these policemen came up and said, you are not allowed to go there, and so. And we normally you could even after when it was closed, when you come with a race car, every police let you in the circuit, but this one was not possible, so we had to run on a normal road. And we came in the traffic jam, and in a small village somewhere, it was terrible, and probably we damaged the engine.
I think that was the last year you weren't in the paddock, wasn't it?
Yeah. From 82, we had our own tent in the paddock. Yeah. And some years later, they built the new building with the garages or boxes or so on.
Yeah.
Nobody really can imagine what this happened. We had a garage in Spa. We had somewhere in Staffelo. and you enter the circuit and went with the race car to the paddock. Or to the pits, actually. Paddock was not really. Yeah.
Now, I really wanted to talk to you about some of the drivers you worked with, because you worked with so many over your time at Porsche. But just before I do, I've got some readers' questions here. There's some here from Ben Johnson, which sort of brings the Porsche story sort of more up to date. He's asking, does the future of electric road cars excite you?
Not really.
Should I just move on to the next question? Okay. I think
really.
I like this. I like this one from Ben. How compromised is the 911 with the engine beyond the rear axle?
Well, in the old days with the RSR, for instance, it was a little bit a challenge to the driver. But now, with all the technical possibilities you have, and I think a big step was from the aerodynamic side, this rear spoiler, because these 911, the basic 911, is like other cars, have quite some lift. Downforces on road cars was not there. So, and you got also a different lift balance. And especially the 911 with the weight at the back and a lot of lift at the back. So the rear spoiler on the RSR helped a lot, because that's why actually everybody comes, the car feels really nice. So, and of course you could do wider rear tires, which actually at the beginning, the front and rear tire were all the same in this, but making wider rear tires helped. And today, I think in 911, when you drive, you don't feel it as a rear engine.
Yeah. Just going back to the electric car future, what with all your engineering experience, what do you see as the future of road cars?
It's not easy to say, but I think it could be a compromise. It's something. Well, hybrid we have already. Yeah. And nobody really cares about the spectators. They don't really realize that it's a hybrid car. But I think it's quite a big step. And maybe there is what Le Mans tries, this hydrogen. Yeah. Or this is one way, and Mr. Fillon, the president, is really fixed on that. He thinks that is a good idea. Basically, he's right, but we should also, and this is, I think, the next step, and this is more raceable, is the e-fuel, the scientific fuel, or what we
the
have.
biofuel, yeah.
And I think both kinds could survive. And of course, electric. We have the Formula E today, and it's nice racing, but a little. I think for racing, you need also a little sound of an engine.
Yeah, but I think I
now you hear only the noise of a gearbox.
yeah. I suppose that's for me. That's always been why Le Mans is such a wonderful race, because when there were diesels there, when Peugeot and Audi came in with the diesels, if you had a whole grid of cars like that, it wouldn't have been such a great spectacle. Whereas you still had the V10 Aston Martin, you had the diesels up at the front, you had petrol cars, and that's surely the brilliance of Le Mans, is it not?
Well, Le Mans is very special, and I remember, and I was very often there when you are in the pit road, and the car passes by, and you hear the noise when they're coming up, and then they pass you, and then the sound changes completely, going up to the Dunlop bridge. That's what, for me, it belongs also to Le Mans. Anyhow, if a turbo engine or an aspirated engine, aspirated is even better in the sound, and you feel when you are there on Saturday night, and on Sunday morning, the sound is completely different. It sounds different, and this is amazing. And I don't know why, but it's maybe because you are tired and you hear different. I don't know, but this is what, for me, it's also a very important thing for Le Mans. The sound from Saturday and Sunday, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And of course, and I think it doesn't matter if it's a diesel or a fuel engine. It doesn't matter really. The sound is different. It depends on how many cylinders you have, or you have a lot of turbos in, so it's much more quieter.
Now, you've worked with so many drivers, but I suppose I wanted to start with Jackie Ickx. Because really, it was Daytona in the 935 with Jochen Mass that I always think of one of his great races, and also Le Mans in '77. What was Jackie like to work with?
Fantastic. He was, and I think it's not just Jackie. I realized that with other real professional drivers, when they start working with the car, and in the old days you don't have any data, so you had only what your information was through the driver, and this was important. Not just and you had to understand the driver. I said it. Normally, as a young engineer, you hear what he's saying, but this is not enough. You need to know what he is meaning. And a big example I had when I had one test once in my very young time with Hans Hermann, before he stopped. And he told me, and he was not actually comfortable with a young engineer, which was right from the university. He was probably used to experienced engineers. And he said, look, my young friend, when I talked to Mr. Falk, Peter Falk, he was an experienced, and he was actually my boss at the end. And I said, well, I think we should make the car softer. And he made it stiffer. And then he came up and said, that's exactly what I mean. And in these days, I didn't understand what he means. But actually, through all these, my experience with Porsche and the race cars, it's what means the driver, and it's sometimes a little different what he says. And when you have no experience and with the driver, and then you actually not really, you come not together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's different. Some drivers are expressing it very complicated. Some are more straightforward, or some are a little bit mixed or so. Or the other thing is, we had one as a driver. they started with all the kinds of problems when we had in practice. For instance, he has quite some understeer. And then we have the gear shift was not right. And then we have a lot of oversteer. And then he came up and said, but the engine, I think it's not really fully right. So you have 3 or 4 or 5 these items. And what do you do first? Fighting against understeer? Fighting against oversteer? And you don't understand. And when you come up and say, well, in that corner, and then you ask the second driver, what is your opinion? And he said, in the same corner where the first one had understeer, he said, I have oversteer. And then you don't understand anything.
Yeah.
And that's what you mean. So, and then you work with them and you come up and said, he has more emphasis of entering the corner and not going out. And the other one has no problem entering the corner, but exiting fast is a problem. So he has the oversteer and exiting fast, and the other one has a problem going in fast with an understeer.
Yeah.
Then you know what I mean. That's what the drivers mean. And that you had to know where is their emphasis. Is it going in or going out?
And Jackie,
and that's what you don't see in the data.
Yeah, well, that's it's as you say, it's so different now. There's nothing that doesn't have a sensor on it or a data trace, or But I wanted to ask you about Le Mans in '77 with Jackie in the 936, because I think he thinks of that as one of his greatest ever drives. Certainly, from what I can tell, it was. What's your opinion?
He afterwards. He told me that he will never have such an effort more in his life than in that race. This was the last big effort what he could do. Mm. And when you see, he was driving, just with the minimum interruption, what the regulation says, with 1 hour. He was driving full time, 10 hours, 12 hours, in the night, doing lap records and all these things. And actually, he was right. He said we had to put pressure on the Renault. Otherwise, they're driving gently and win the race. And he was absolutely right. And he really did a big, big effort. And when you saw him right after the race in his helmet, you said, is it really Jackie? It looks completely different.
Yeah. Did he not lose more than a stone in body weight?
Pardon, he lost?
Did he not lose a stone in body weight over the race?
Oh yeah. I think it was 4 or 5 kilos.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, wasn't it? And this was because it was was it not a Conrad that went on his car?
Yeah, on his basic car. Yeah.
Now we must just take a moment to pause the podcast there and thank our partner, Princess Yachts. Princess Yachts has been a long-time supporter of Motorsport Magazine, and we are absolutely delighted that they're on board as the partner of this series on Porsche. Much like the one with the green cover, Princess Yachts epitomizes the very best of British manufacturing, and they do incredible things on a daily basis. Do check out their website at princessyachts.com. When Jackie finally stood down, the drama didn't stop, did it? Because I think were there not more problems with the car after that?
What do you mean with the problems?
Because Jackie stood down from the driving, and then Jürgen Barth and Hurley Haywood carried on. But I think there was you were in the lead by quite some margin.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then we had a I think it was a Conrad problem, right? An hour or 45 minutes before the end of the race, and so we were leading. And the second couldn't catch up, but you had to run over the start and finish line at the end of the race. So we cut it, the ignition and fuel off of that cylinder. And Jürgen Barth did a wonderful job. He did the minimum of 3 laps. To have the last lap had to be in a certain time of your qualifying time. So, and when you enter the pits for this engine problem, you started already the lap. So we were standing there for half an hour or so in the pits. So the lap time of the last lap was half an hour. So we had to go out, go again over the start and finish line, start a new lap, do your minimum lap, and then lap time, and then you can finish the race.
And that was your fourth Le Mans win. I think you, by the time you finished your 29 Le Mans 24 hours, you'd won it 16 times. Is that one of the ones that sticks out the most, or were there other ones that you remember?
Oh yeah, there are a lot. There were a lot of. Well, this is one of the highlights, of course. But there's some others which were. It's always a thing with Le Mans. When you have, for instance, we had in the 956 once we had a race which was absolutely without any problem, and in that case you get more and more nervous because you normally have a problem, a small one, a puncture or whatever. You always have a kind of problem. And when you race for 10 hours, 12 hours, 15 hours, and you don't have anything, you get really nervous because now it must be happen. And it happened actually. You had a puncture. You changed the wheel. He went out again. He did not really lost a lot of time. And then you are quiet and said, okay, now we had the problem. Now we can finish the
Yeah,
race.
you mentioned the 956 there, the 956 and the 962. How much was that a challenge for you as an engineer? Because that was your first monocoque, was it not, at Porsche?
Yeah, I think the monocoque was, of course, it was a new situation. But we did it like we did it all in the past with Porsche. We had the possibility of going to other companies and said, "Can you make us a monocoque, like Lola or March, or even when we went to Dornier and asked about what rivets, what metal, what glue, what did you use?" So we want to learn it because we can do it, and maybe we can do it very special and very in our kind, not having somebody and said, we do it always like this and now we do it again, so we want to do it our own. We don't know it. And we did a lot of test bodies with twisting and bending, and we learned about the riveting and and all these kinds. So within, I think, weeks, we got a lot of knowledge. And at the end, we tried to, now we make a monocoque like we did in the past with the space frame. It was an old tradition, but when you start making your first space frame, it's also a new challenge. So why not? So, and we did it, and well, it was fine. The monocoque was actually never a real problem. And when I read some interesting books, now I think there are a lot of books about the 956 and so on, especially from the American side. The American are always, we make it better. Whatever you do, give us, we make it better. They went up and said, we make a honeycomb monocoque, and we make it with special aluminum. We made it because the people know about it. The Porsche, they are learning. They had no idea. At the end, what the weak point in stiffness was never the monocoque. It was the frame and the clutch housing. This was actually the problem. And they never talked about this. Because the monocoque was the stiffest part of the Unity.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
We'll talk briefly about the GT1, the car in '98 that won the race. Is it fair to say that the 956, the 962 really is arguably the most successful sports car of all time? Helped by obviously all the Porsche customer teams. There were so many on the grid, but it's hard to argue any other sports car was as successful. Is that fair?
That's fair. I think it's fair because as Porsche always supported the customers, and it was pretty clear. And I found a note when we had the first rollout and before we raced in Silverstone the first time in '82, we had already a meeting how many cars we can make for customers. So we didn't even know how the car was working, but we were thinking already about customer cars. That was important for us.
Yeah.
So, and it was sure, okay, we make customer cars. Customers try their own way with some kinds of 936s or special bought special chassis from March or whatever. And when they got the car and we offered them the car, they all jumped on these cars. So at the end, I think we made hundreds.
Mm. Yeah, of the hundreds
we could homologate the car in GT.
Well, yeah, with the Dower. There's some phrase in motorsports, of the hundreds you made, it's great to see so many thousands of them still racing today.
yeah. and more coming.
Yes, exactly. I wanted to ask about the Spa 24 Hours in 2003. Because you always say that was a race that really stood out for you. You were there with a 911, and I think Dumas was quite a young gun then.
This was of course when Porsche was not really have their own racing program, they supported the customers, and on that way, I came to the customers department and we supported some customers. In that case, I think it was Freisinger, and they run the RS, and they had who was also on the car. It was Ortelli was on the car and Mark Lieb was on the car. Ortelli was an experienced driver and successful. Mark Lieb was coming as a young one. And we had Romain Dumas, the youngster. Nobody knows him really, but he was a nice guy. And he has a very special kind of talking and so on. And I liked it. And of course, when the race started, at Spa, as usual, you start in dry, and after 2 hours it was raining, and it's a little bit, and after half an hour it was dry, and you change to dry tires, and then it starts raining again. So, and of course, Ortelli started, and then came Mark Lieb, and after, 3, 4, 5 hours, the youngster, Romain Dumas, came into the car, because you need 3 drivers, because 24 hours is, you need 3. Today you need 3. The old days it was 2. And during the pit stop, we changed the tires, and of course we put slick on again, but new ones. And it started raining. And I remember very well when Romain opened the door and said, "Look, it's raining and you put me slicks on. Are you sure?" And I said, yeah, it's fine. It will stop in 2 laps. The first 2 laps, be very careful with cold slicks in rain, but then it's dry. And we were lucky. The rain stopped, and he was, after 2 or 3 laps, he could race on and all the rest of the field. They had changed already before, so they changed to race to rain tires, and after 4 laps they changed back to dry tire. So we had quite a big lead already by these funny decisions. And he made it excellent. He made it really excellent. I said, be careful and don't hurry, and he made it perfect.
Yeah.
Well, now he's a big driver.
He's gone on to achieve a lot, Romain, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's excellent.
Yeah. Now we've got sort of 5-10 minutes left. I wanted to ask you about Derek Bell. He was such a successful driver, sports car driver, for Porsche. Am I right in thinking that he was kind of, in some senses, he was the greatest team player of all the drivers? Yeah. He was. Derek Bell was in the old days. He always had big names like Joe Siffert or Rodriguez or Jackie X. They were, let's say, more famous in Europe. In England is different because he is English. And what his speciality was, he could run at a really high speed, very constant, and don't do anything to the car. And Jackie X selected him only for Le Mans, because he said once, when I get out of the car and Derek is doing a double stint
and after that I go back into the car. The car is exactly how I left it. So there it had a wonderful style of not doing anything to the car. And that's why he's successful, because he never crashed, he never ruined an engine or whatever. So he was fast anyhow. So he was a perfect driver in sports car racing when you need two drivers.
Yeah, and in the era of the fuel regulations, he was also very easy on the fuel, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Norbert, we've talked sort of. There's so much to talk about with you. I feel that everyone listening will be screaming out, "Why haven't you talked about that? Why haven't you talked about that?" And really, it's time. We could do a series of 10 podcasts with you and still not finish it all. But I wanted to kind of just finish with a couple of things. First of all, which car do you look back on the most fondly? You were involved in so many great Porsche sports cars. Is the one that holds a special place in your heart?
Yeah, of course it was. I think it was the 956.
Yeah.
Which we started with a white paper, and we could actually do what we as engineer want to do. In the old days, when you sit on a 917 or 908 or whatever, or 936, so the basic was already done. But in that case, we could do what really we want. And then we came up and said, well, we had with the monocoque, we had some discussions with the board, because they said we always, since decades, we're making the best space frames, and why we should do monocoque. And so the arguments are it should be much more safer, much more stiffer, and so on. At least they said, okay, then try it. So, and we got the opportunity, and we did the best what we could do. So this is actually, and from the aerodynamic side to introduce the ground force in a sports car. It was already known and I think Lotus did it first in Formula One, and they said, we know ground effects. Ground effects, Formula One has it, but it's a complete different story in sports car, because sports car is from the shape completely different, and we had to learn it, and we learned it I think in 1 week. Which way we had to go. Yeah. And when you look through, and this was one of the big advantages of the 956 or 962, because we had managed to find a very efficient ground effect. When you look on the Ford, what they tried, or on the Lolas or on the March, and when I had some time ago, I had a look in the old, I think Autosport or Motorsport from these days. I had copies from these days where these guys are introducing their new Group C cars. It was a Jaguar, and it was a March, and it was a Lola, and it was a Grid, and it was a Ford, and it was Lancia, and Lancia came a year later. And they all had famous aerodynamicists and famous companies doing their cars. And when I saw 2 years later, nothing was left from them. Because they went to the IMSA, they went to Japan, they went to other series just to avoid racing against the 956. That's my opinion.
to bring it up to
look on the grid in 83, 84.
Yeah.
Yeah. Only Lancia was there.
Yeah. It sort of brings us up to date. There's a question here from Mr. A.R. Felix about the sort of LMDH and the hypercar rules. Before I'd sort of ask the question, what are your thoughts on these new rules at Le Mans with these two categories?
Well, it reminds me a little bit in the year of '94. We had a GT race car, a GT1 race car, and Toyota had a prototype car. So we have a similar situation. Now you call it not GT1, you call it hypercar, And in the old days, it was the prototype cars, which you have still. Some are doing these prototype cars, which is a basic chassis, a basic chassis and suspension, but you just have the possibility of having a different engine. But the situation is similar. You have a kind of road-based race car, and you raced against a prototype car. And today you have the possibility, and I hope they do it all right with all the kinds of sensors and softwares to balance these two cars. Why not?
You were obviously, at Le Mans, you helped advise on the balance of performance. Is it really going to be possible to balance the performance of these two different cars?
I think it's possible. Because today they take all these cars in the same wind tunnel and check the aerodynamics. They take the engines on the dyno and look. Or no, they do. What they do is they give a certain power line, with or without hybrid, doesn't matter. And you have these power line. And you are not allowed to go over the power line. With the software and sensors today, you can control it very easy. So why not? So you run the same power. You are all in the same aerodynamic window. Then you have the next one is, what about the tires? Is there the tires are free? So are you running Michelin, or you're running Goodyear, or running Yokohama, or whatever? This could be a different.
Yeah.
But this we will see.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if so many tire companies are working and spending a lot of money to get into that. So maybe Michelin will supply them all the kind of tires, and then this problem is also solved.
Yeah. So then just finally, this question from Mr.
And the next one there will be a category, what I said before, maybe with hydrogen cars, and hydrogen cars should be, or with e-fuel cars. This is another category. Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the field is open.
Yeah, well, it's what Le Mans should be. There's a question here from Mr. A.R. Felix, and he's saying, I know it's cheaper, but are you not afraid that not building your own car for Le Mans, as in LMDH, just kind of waters down any kudos you may gain from racing?
Yeah, of course. When you can't not make your own car, that means chassis, suspension, aerodynamic, all these things are, then that's what Porsche always did. But we saw it several times in the past. In GT1, when you could do a lot of things, you spend so much money.
Yeah.
And at the end, you have one or two manufacturers racing. And I talked several times to Pierre Fillon in some years ago, and to Jean Todt, and said, make these LMP1 cheaper. Who can afford spending 300, 400, 500 million euros per year? Nobody can do it for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we think about it. So now I think it's the cost cap what they're doing, and they end up with a standard chassis and standard things to make it cheap, and standard hybrid system. Because in the days today, of course, there are one or two companies who can afford and paying a lot of money for development, but then you have only one or two in the race, and everybody said the race is not very interesting because we have only two cars, or one car, one manufacturer. Yeah. So when you want several, 4 or 5 manufacturers involved, you had to make it cheaper, and that's it.
Yeah.
If this is the right way, I don't know, but you had to make it cheaper. This is important.
Yeah.
We cannot spend so much money.
I think someone who has spent so long at the forefront of Porsche and motorsport, we need to listen to you. And it's been absolutely fascinating for the last hour or so. So Norbert, thank you so much for joining us all. Thank you all to those who are watching, those who are listening, and we'll be back again soon with another podcast in our Porsche's Winning Formula series. Norbert, thank you. Bye-bye to everyone.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. It was nice. Bye-bye.